I've got more thoughts today. I have been thinking of my gear journey. It's one of the most fun parts of any hobby, in my opinion. I like gear. I like thinking about gear. I like looking at gear. I like reading about gear. I like buying gear. I used to like selling gear, but now I like just having gear and keeping it. But I'm trying not to be too much in the game of getting in and out of systems in any of my hobbies, especially photography. So when Sony came out with the FX-30, it was a pretty interesting and compelling argument against the Fuji X-H2S for the best value cinema camera. And I've been thinking for a while, I've been doing a bit of research, and I've been thinking, as a person who is more focused on video, does the Sony make sense over the X-H2S? And I guess long story short, I'm going to say I still don't think it does. I think the FX-30 further hammers home how good the X-H2S is. So a couple of thoughts. The first one, price came to mind. I was thinking right away, if you are a video-focused shooter, the FX-30 is pretty crazy value. I mean, what that camera can do for, I think in Canadian, it's about 2,500 Canadian, so it's $700 or $800 cheaper than the X-H2S. Maybe 1,000 cheaper, but it's within the ballpark, closer in price to like an XT5 or XH2 than the XH2S. But I don't look at the XH2 or XT5 for my uses, because if you're shooting wildlife video, I consider 4K 120 to be a non-starter. I wouldn't consider a camera that doesn't have it. I think that crisp 4K slow motion is really important. So the FX-30 gives you the 4K 120. Sony obviously knows their way around Cine cameras. They've got a big Cine line. But I start thinking, what does a kit look like if you go that route? So the answer is probably you go with the Sony 200 to 600 lens, which, good lens for sure, very sharp. A little bit faster in low light. I think it's a stop or 2/3 of a stop faster than the 150 to 600 from Fuji. I don't love the weight of the Sony lens, although I would say if I was shooting video, I don't know that I would care. At that point, I'm carrying it on a strap, so what's an extra pound if it's on a strap around my neck? And I'd probably have a tripod. I'm not hand holding it. I haven't owned the Sony 2 to 600, but when I've shot it and held friends' copies, I've definitely noticed it's hefty. It's not a lens I would want to hold out in my hand all day unsupported. People do. It's not a crazy brick, but for me, Fuji's engineering department talked about why they purposefully made their new zoom an f8 lens rather than a 6.3, and they said it shaved off a pound or something of weight. And I think that's a pretty big difference if you're hand holding the lens. You do feel that for sure. But if it's on a tripod, it probably doesn't matter. So, the lens option, you probably get a used 200 to 600 for a good price too, so you could save a few bucks there. So you're saving money on the camera and the lens for sure. But I think that's probably where the pluses stop for me. The one caveat that I don't know is potentially the autofocus. The Sony, if we believe Sony's autofocus system is better than Fuji's, which maybe it is, but I think it's a marginal gap at this point with the new Fuji system. I'm not talking like XT3, XT4. The X-H2S is an amazing autofocus system for stills, and it's good for video. My issue is, even though the Sony has 700 and something autofocus points to the 400 and change on the Fuji, I am not convinced that the video autofocus is going to be reliable for wildlife. And I guess when I am looking at video autofocus, I kind of put it into two categories. Does it work and you trust it implicitly or not? And I don't believe there's a camera really in the world that I would trust implicitly. And if there is, maybe you're looking at a Z9 or something like that. But again, I would say everyone I've talked to who owns these flagships for video still says, yeah, sometimes it hunts and sometimes it misses shots. And as I've said in other videos, look, that's not a big deal if you're shooting stills, because if you're shooting stills and you're shooting 20 or 30 frames per second and you miss a few, you're going to have other stills you can use. Even if the one you want isn't the sharp one, there's going to be enough there that typically you can get something. If you're shooting video and you lose and it starts pulsing, especially you're shooting a slow motion clip, and that loss and that hunt all of a sudden is exaggerated by 4 or 5 times because of your slowdown rate, you've probably ruined the clip. So, I mean, I use the Fuji video autofocus a lot, and I use it usually for stuff that if I don't get it, it doesn't matter. It's usually I'm looking for B-roll, or I'm out and I'm, like recently I've been out, I was shooting otters on this pond. I'm there for the otters. That's what I care about. But there was a family of common mergansers, and I love them. They're great. I have lots of stuff with them. Didn't particularly need more. Wasn't really in the mood to be tracking them and using manual focus, but I thought, hey, if I can just point it, autofocus, and get some clips, and they're good, sharp clips, it's great. If it hunted and the clip was garbage, I'd just delete it and wouldn't use it. I didn't really need it. The otters, for a couple of days, they were very predictable, and I was having really good luck. But now I haven't seen them for a while, and hopefully they'll come back. But it's the kind of thing, this isn't an animal that I can set my watch to. They're not predictable. I don't know when I'm going to see them. I don't know what they're going to be doing. So the last thing on earth that I want to get home is find out that my autofocus missed. And when I first saw them, I used a lot of autofocus for them, and I got a lot of stuff that's usable. But there's certainly moments that got cut that had I been shooting manual focus, I wouldn't have had to lose the moment. So the autofocus worked on the Fuji. It got me a lot of stuff, but it still isn't something that I have full faith in. So going over to the Sony, I haven't seen any examples so far that have shown me like it is next to flawless. And I think for me to trust a video autofocus system, it would have to be that good. So if it's not, then I don't know. It's just not something. I wouldn't give the Sony a win, even if the autofocus system is better. Let's say the Fuji is 7 out of 10 reliable, and let's say the Sony's 8.5 out of 10 reliable. That's still not enough that I would trust it on an important moment, and I would end up using manual focus anyway, so I'm not going to give you points for that. So my issue is the FX-30, I don't see, and see below if you're a big Sony fan or if you're a cine expert and you happen to be watching my little ranty video and you know better than I, comment below. I'm happy to learn. But I don't see really any tangible benefits that the Sony brings that the Fuji doesn't have on the video side. Frame rate, codecs. I'm sure that you could find a couple of small benefits, but at the end of the day, I think if you take both cameras out into the field and shoot them, you're going to get really high quality video footage out of both. So I don't think that the Sony's bringing an advantage there, which gets us to the Sony's big Achilles heel. If it's not giving you an advantage on the video side, we have to talk about how it totally sucks on the stills side. I guess they included stills capability just because why not? But you're talking right away, there's no EVF, so you're shooting everything off the screen. It can only shoot single shot focus or shutter drive, so that's unusable. No one's going out as a full-time wildlife photographer shooting single shot. So I look at it and say, if you said I care not at all about stills, all I care about is video, and I want to get the most video capability for the best price, then I guess the FX-30 looks pretty good. I mean, I certainly wouldn't argue that the video capability is worse than the Fuji. The lens has been out for a long time, so you can find a better deal on the lens. Yeah, I guess you could argue further too. Sony does have some other primes, so if you wanted to spend more money on like a 600 f4 or something like that, Sony has that as an option. Fuji does not have those lenses right now. But I think most people would be buying a camera of this price range using one of those two zooms. So yeah, the Sony is going to save you some money for sure, especially if you buy a used copy of the lens and save, $1,000 on the camera. But I guess that's where I look at it and say, okay, if I'm buying them both for the video capability and they're tied, would I spend an extra $700 to $900 or whatever it is to get the Fuji, which is not only is it a functional stills camera, it's a phenomenal powerhouse of a stills camera, and it's also a powerhouse of a video camera. And this is why I keep hitting this point home in all my videos, that I think the X-H2S is just such a tremendous value because it's so good at stills and it's so good at video that I still don't really think there's anything on the market that competes with it on both avenues in that budget. And again, it shot an R5 for a long time. There's nothing the X-H2S does that the R5 doesn't do. But I don't really think there's all that much that the R5 does that the Fuji doesn't do. And again, when you're talking wildlife, yes, the full frame R5 let's say it's got 1 stop better noise, but much less reach. So by the time you crop in the R5 to equivalent lengths, when I'm looking at my old photos that I've taken on both cameras, I'm not seeing like a night and day difference for a camera that costs almost twice as much. So bang for buck, I think Fuji wins again. We will see the next contender to the ring, but if you're talking a hybrid system that can crush video and crush photos, I think the X-H2S is still the king. So no, I will not be buying an FX-30.